Hi everyone. As I'm waiting for people to join in, and I'd like to first to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Osak. I'm a social media director for the Hearing Loss Association of America Boston chapter. I'm very excited to be here, and we have a very special guest tonight, where we are going to learn more about the Auracast. Before we pass along to Carrie Sivonen, who is the Hearing Loss Association Boston chapter president, I want to remind everyone to make sure that you are muted and the closed captions are available on the bottom. If you click more and turn on the closed captions. And at the end of the meeting, we will be doing a Q&A. If you have any questions at the bottom, please click raise hand or ask a question in the chat room. Again, thank you very much. And we are going to move along to Carrie for introduction. So Carrie, if you could please unmute yourself and share.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I'm very excited to introduce Tom Kaufman, our speaker for today. Tom is the founder and chief technology officer of OTOjOY, a firm that is the leading expert in hearing loop installations in the US. As a technologist and accessibility consultant, Tom works at the forefront of developing and integrating novel as well as established assistive technologies into society. With postgraduate degrees in physics from the University of Bonn, Germany, and chemistry from UCal Santa Barbara, Thomas brings a rigorous scientific background to this role. His innovations have garnered international recognition and have been honored with a CES Innovation Award, which recognizes outstanding technical design in consumer electronic products, and with an Edison Award, which is a global recognition of the highest level of new product and service development, with innovation and human-centered design at its forefront. Thomas is also a contributing member of the Technical Committee 29, which is focused on electroacoustics of the IEC, where his work focuses on hearing aids and hearing loop systems. As a PhD candidate at Arizona State University, Thomas's research delves into auditory and language neuroscience. He is breaking new ground with brain-computer interfaces for augmentative and alternative communication. His newest invention aims to offer a voice to individuals who have complete paralysis, enabling these individuals to speak, sing, and play musical instruments even after they lose the ability to use eye-tracking devices. Drawing inspiration from the serene desert landscape, Thomas has made Phoenix, Arizona his home, where he shares his passions for music, art, food, and innovation with his partner Lucy and his two cats, Bug and Da Vinci. Please join me in welcoming Tom Kaufman.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Gary. Let me see. I'll have to replace the screen share so I can put this on my slides here. Okay, I believe we're good to go, right? Can I get a yes from one of you?
Yep, I can see her clearly. Thank you, Thomas.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I can almost skip my first slide because Carrie already covered all of this. My background in physics and chemistry, that I started OTOjOY 12 years ago. We've since installed over 1,000 hearing loop systems in the United States. And I'm currently a PhD student in speech and hearing science at Arizona State University. And then, as mentioned, on the IEC committee that defines and maintains the performance standards for hearing loop systems, and now also on working group 13 for hearing aids, who's responsible for developing the new IEC performance standard for Auracast systems, or anything that might come along that's equivalent to it. What Carrie didn't mention is that I have 4 invisible disabilities. The first one is ADHD, like a lot of other people. The second one is that I'm autistic. Some of you already know that. Some of you may have guessed that. Now all of you know. The third one that most of you probably don't know is that I have epilepsy and I have bipolar disorder. And because of some or all of these, I use assistive listening technology. Not because I can't hear well, but because my brain needs a little help to understand and process audio. And when I'm in an overstimulating environment with lots of background noises, and I grab a pair of headphones and use a hearing loop system or an FM system or any assistive listening system, it's much easier for my brain to process. It's much easier for me to pay attention for longer. And it's just a much more relaxing experience overall. So while it looks like from the outside, I may not be a user of assistive listening technology because my audiogram is a flat 0 across the board and I have no hearing loss at all, there are other reasons why this technology helps me and why, aside from advocating for you, it's also helpful to me. So most of you already know how an assistive listening system works in general. But for those of you that don't, we have a brief video, which somehow isn't in this slide deck. Give me 1 second to see how I can pull this up.
If you weren't in presentation mode, videos won't show.
No, it's somehow the slide with the video is missing from this deck, and I think the reason for that is because I had prepared it for export as a PDF, so I can share it easily, and then the video isn't in there. And there's another one that I need to make sure we have in here, and this one I think is there. Yeah, okay. All right, I think we're good. I'll be back in just a second. Okay.
This is the sign that means a world of difference for people with hearing loss. That's because any facility that has this sign also has a hearing loop. Hearing loops are widely regarded as the most effective, easiest to use, and most trouble-free assistive listening technology available. While most people with hearing loss have hearing aids, they do little to help them hear clearly in group settings. A hearing loop, however, sends clear, pure sound from a sound system directly to the user's hearing aid without any distortion or background noise. Now, the vast majority of hearing aids, whether old or new, already have what is known as a T-coil or telecoil built in, which just needs to be activated by a hearing professional to use a hearing loop. For example, here's what a typical group presentation sounds like to someone using just a hearing aid.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're offering the following activities.
And here's what it sounds like to a hearing aid user with the help of a hearing loop.
Good morning, everyone. Today we're offering the following activities.
Unlike other assistive listening systems that require headsets, Hearing loops are the only solution that uses the unique tuning to each person's individual pattern of hearing loss and doesn't require any additional equipment. And as you just heard for yourself, the difference is night and day. You can easily find all hearing loop enabled venues near you by downloading the free Loop Finder app for your smartphone or by going to loopfinder.com. So, the next time you see this sign, know that for many, it means experiencing the gift of hearing that makes their ears smile.
So, in essence, how does an assistive listening system work? You have a sound source, be it a microphone or some audio device that plays a movie, and it's connected to a sound system. The sound system is then connected to the hearing loop amplifier or whatever the transmitter for the assistive listening system may be. And then you have a receiving device in the audience. And in the case of a hearing loop system, that's your own hearing aid or cochlear implant, and you receive the wireless signal directly into your hearing device. And so for many of you that have experienced an assistive listening system, this is easy to understand and you know what difference it makes for you. But for someone who has no hearing loss, or even someone with hearing loss who has not experienced an assistive listening system before, it might be a bit of a challenge. And so I always try to find an analogy to explain to someone who has never had this experience what kind of a difference it makes when you use such a system. And essentially what it does is it makes you hear like nobody else can. And so when you look up and you look at the night sky, it looks like this. But that's actually just what you think the night sky looks like, because what it really looks like is this, if you look at it with the right equipment. And so essentially with an assistive listening system, you have the auditory equivalent of a telescope. You no longer have to rely on the room acoustics and the distance to get the sound from the source to your ears. You're now taken right to the sound source, and it sounds like the person speaking or singing is right next to your ear. And so aside from it being louder and clearer, you now also hear a lot more detail that you wouldn't be able to hear when you're just listening through loudspeakers or with your ears in the room. So now, in the realm of assistive listening technology, the systems that have traditionally been out there have been FM systems that use a radio transmitter, infrared systems that use visible light, and then a hearing loop system that uses electromagnetic fields via induction to the telecoil in a device. And so there is a new technology that is now available to consumers that has the potential to bring a lot of change to the way we interact with sound. And that technology is called Auracast. And if you wanted to summarize what Auracast is, it's basically one of two assistive listening technologies that provide direct to hearing device audio streaming without the need for any additional equipment or interactions with venue staff. And so the other one, as you may have guessed, is a hearing loop system. So basically what Auracast allows to do is for the sound from the sound system to be sent directly to a hearing aid or a cochlear implant or a pair of wireless earbuds or headphones without having to pick up any additional equipment from the venue. So it essentially provides independence and the clean access to sound. And if I were to put it a different way, I would say that Auracast is the holy grail of hearing technology. It's basically what we've all been wanting for years. And what that is we want to be able to provide the same experience that a hearing loop system provides, or better, without the complex infrastructure installation that a hearing loop system may entail. And so in 2012, when I started the company, I met Richard McKinley from Contacta, and I went through their training to learn about hearing loops, what they are, how they're installed, what benefits they provide, all of the technical aspects of it. And Richard had a list of requirements for a technology that would eventually replace hearing loop systems. And a lot of the things that you'll see on this list were on Richard's list already, and I added a couple items to it because I changed the title of this list. It's not about what we're looking for to replace a hearing loop system. It's the requirements for what I would consider any successful assistive listening technology. And so the first thing that it needs to provide is user-friendly connectivity and independence. It needs to be easy to connect to the system, and it needs to be done in a way that you can just walk into the place and you don't have to interact with anybody else. You don't need to tell anybody that you have trouble hearing or would like to use the system. It needs to be facilitated in a way that you can just walk in and look and interact like anybody else. It needs to be available in most hearing aids, preferably most hearing aids that people are already wearing today. It needs to be globally universal across all manufacturers. It doesn't really help us if only one or two companies provide access to the system and you need something different for each person. It needs to be universal. It needs to have low battery drain, or ideally no additional battery drain compared to using the hearing aid in the way you usually use it. And it should come at a minimal cost, or ideally no cost to the user. Those items were all on the list before. What I added to the list is that it should provide high fidelity stereo sound. And stereo is something that a lot of people question in the realm of assistive listening. They say, well, for speech, why do you need stereo? And even for music, it doesn't really help with understanding, comprehension. But from my perspective, it's not about creating access to sound and making sure people can understand what is being said. In my perspective, it's about creating equal access, providing the same or an equivalent experience to people with a hearing disability or other auditory related disability that someone without a disability has. We want to create the same experience for you that other people can enjoy. And in my book, that means it needs to be high fidelity and it needs to be stereo. It needs to be the kind of sound quality that an audiophile listener would consider acceptable. And then in the same category with that is that we need low latency below 30 milliseconds. And we'll talk specifically about the value of 30 milliseconds. But essentially what this means is that there can't be a delay between the sound that you hear from the loudspeakers and the sound that is coming through the assistive listening system. And then item number 8 is that it needs to be easy to deploy in venues. And sadly, with hearing loop systems, we don't meet requirement number 8. In some instances, it's relatively easy, but in other instances, it can be rather complex and it can get comparatively expensive. Now, there are very few venues that don't qualify for a hearing loop, but sometimes you have situations where technical issues get in the way, or there might be interference from power lines that may not be resolvable. So there are some hurdles that sometimes can't be overcome. But when I say easy to deploy, what I mean is plug a box into a power outlet, plug an audio cable into it, and configure some software. Not pull up the carpet and saw cut into concrete and make a huge mess in the venue. So with the hearing loop system, we're meeting the first 5 criteria. We don't have stereo, but that's more of a bonus in my perspective. And then number 7, the low latency, we do meet with a loop system. But there are some caveats with that too. And it's not easy to deploy in venues. And so with Auracast, the potential is there to meet all 8 of those requirements at the same time. And that's extremely exciting, because what that means is that with Auracast, we may finally get to the point where assistive listening technology becomes ubiquitous and is available wherever we go. And so with that, we'll do this as a virtual version. I presented this at the HLAA convention in June here in Phoenix, and we did the show of hands. You don't have to press any buttons, because I think once you see the questions, we all know how many hands would go up in the audience. So the question would be, who's using Auracast right now? And in the room, there was an Auracast system. And I think we had, I'm guessing, 100 people in the room. And I think 3 people raised their hands that were actively using the Auracast system. The second question was, who's using the hearing loop right now? And almost all hands went up. Question number 3 was who didn't understand the questions, because it gets more complicated after this. So the next question was, if overnight all places with amplified sound globally had Auracast, who in the room would want to use it tomorrow? And basically all hands went up. And then the next part of the question is, who of you could use it tomorrow without buying new hearing devices? And it was the same 3 people that were already using it in the room that day. And so this is precisely the challenge that we're facing with Auracast, that most people don't have compatible hearing devices yet. So even if somehow the Bluetooth Special Interest Group ran an incredibly expensive marketing campaign and donated devices to all venues, and tomorrow all places with amplified sound had an Auracast system, most of you wouldn't be able to use it unless you were to buy new hearing aids or cochlear implant processors or a bone-anchored hearing aid, you name it. And so the question is, how long is it going to take until most of us can use an Auracast system in a venue? And so one of the questions was, what is the limiting factor? Is it the number of transmitters that are deployed in venues, or is it the receiving devices that people already have? And what's really interesting is that an analogy to electric vehicles works surprisingly well when it comes to hearing aids. And here's why. The first aspect to look at is the replacement cycle. How often do people replace their cars? On average, most people buy a new car every 4 to 6 years. For hearing aids, it's about every 3 to 7 years. So it's 5 years on average, plus minus 1 or plus minus 2 years, depending on which of the categories you look at. So it's roughly the same. So then the question is, when was the first Tesla vehicle or the first Auracast device sold? And so for Tesla vehicles, I mean, we've had electric vehicles for quite a while, but really once Tesla came about, that's when things started to take off. And we started to see more and more of those vehicles around, not just Tesla vehicles, but electric vehicles in general. And so the first Tesla was sold in 2008. And now think about that and think about how many electric vehicles you currently see on the road today. And it was in 2008, 16 years ago. 16 years ago when the first Tesla was sold, and the amount of vehicles we have now is how many are out there. So when was the first Auracast hearing aid sold? It was in 2023. It was introduced at the European Hearing Aid Conference in Nuremberg in October 2023, where I presented. And now there's Auracast hearing aids that you can buy. And so far, to the best of my knowledge, only Resound has those in their product portfolio. So with that in mind, the question is, at what point will all new vehicles or hearing aids be what I would call future ready? And for vehicles, that would mean being electric. And for hearing aids, that would mean being Auracast compatible. And for electric vehicles, there is a decent amount of research about that. And current estimates are that by 2035, all new vehicles sold will be electric. That doesn't mean all vehicles on the road will be electric, just that any new vehicle that someone buys will be electric. The estimate is 2035. So then in comparison with Auracast compatible hearing aids, the question is, at what point will all devices, all hearing aids that people buy be Auracast compatible? And the answer is, we don't know. And then the follow-up question to that is, at what point will 95% of the devices or vehicles in circulation be future ready? So the way to look at this is basically, at what point could we dismantle gas stations? At what point do we no longer need those because all vehicles are electric, or essentially all vehicles, And we're not really leaving anybody behind if we no longer have gas stations around. And for electric vehicles, that estimate is 2050. And for hearing aids, by what point will 95% of all hearing aids that people wear be Auracast compatible? And not just from one manufacturer, but all manufacturers, not just the top of the line hearing aids, but even the most affordable ones that health insurance covers? And again, the answer is we don't know. But if we look at the timeline of electric vehicles and we look when the first Auracast compatible hearing aid was sold, we're probably in a similar timeline because the replacement cycle for vehicles and for hearing aids is the same. So we need to get to a point where, one, all manufacturers sell primarily or exclusively Auracast compatible hearing devices, and basically everybody who's wearing hearing aids or cochlear implants today needs to have purchased a new device that is Auracast compatible. That is the point when we will no longer need hearing loops. And so, from a legal standpoint, this is interesting. Where do hearing loops or assistive listening systems need to be provided in general? And so the Americans with Disabilities Act says that in each assembly area where audible communication is integral to the use of the space, an assistive listening system shall be provided. And so what does that mean? What is an assembly area? It's basically any space where people gather. And audible communication being means that if there are loudspeakers and there's a microphone, or you're playing a movie and you have some kind of audible content, whether it's entertainment or education, if you have a microphone or some other sound source with music or speech, and you have loudspeakers, then audible communication is integral to the use of the space, because otherwise you wouldn't have loudspeakers. The way the California Building Code looks at it is essentially that if you have loudspeakers in a space and they're used for anything other than paging or background music, that's when you need an assistive listening system. And so to meet this requirement, you can use any of the available assistive listening technologies. It can be an FM system, an infrared system, or a hearing loop. And technically, it could also be an Auracast device, an Auracast transmitter. Now, what the law requires in addition to that is that the venue provides headset receivers, and it's roughly 1 per 25 seats. So the system needs to be set up in a way that someone who doesn't have their own device can borrow a device from the venue to be able to connect to the audio stream. And then the law requires that 25% minimum of the receivers need to be hearing aid compatible. And what that means is that there has to be a way that you can receive the sound from the wireless system with your hearing aid. And for traditional assistive listening systems, that means using neck loops, where you still borrow the receiver from the venue, you plug in the neck loop, and the neck loop connects to the telecoil in your hearing device. Now, what that also means is that if your hearing aid or cochlear implant doesn't have a telecoil, you're essentially excluded from using any assistive listening system in any venue with your hearing device. Because even if the device in the venue is an FM system or an infrared system, the way for you to use it with your hearing aid is via the telecoil. And so a lot of hearing providers say that telecoils aren't needed because people don't use them for phone calls anymore, which is mainly true because most people use Bluetooth streaming from their phone to their hearing devices. But what people do use telecoils for is to connect to a hearing loop system in a room or to the neck loop with an FM system or an infrared system. So now the question is, from a venue perspective, what should venues provide to create optimal hearing access and legal compliance? And when you think back to what OTOjOY does, what my background is, Our main revenue stream is the installation of hearing loop systems. And we do that in permanent spaces, and we do that in temporary events at conferences, music festivals, etc. At this point, we haven't sold a single Auracast system, but we plan to, because from our perspective, the best way to provide optimal hearing access and to be legally compliant right now is to install an Auracast system and to install a hearing loop system alongside. And so the Auracast system serves newer hearing devices that are Auracast compatible, which most people don't own yet and won't own for a long time. And the hearing loop system is for most hearing devices that people own today. And so what we believe will happen is that at the moment, most people will use the hearing loop system to get the direct audio streaming to the hearing device. And over time, more and more people will have Auracast compatible devices. And as that number of people with Auracast compatible devices increases, those people will switch over to the Auracast transmitter and receive that wireless audio signal. So basically, the venue provides two ways to connect to their sound system. And the venue wouldn't know whether people are using the loop system or the Auracast system. But the expectation is that over time, more and more people will switch over to Auracast until eventually the loop doesn't get much use anymore. But you wouldn't know how many people are using which one in the process, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we create hearing access today for people with existing hearing devices and for people with new hearing devices. And then another aspect that a lot of people forget about when they advocate for just Auracast and no T-coil in our hearing loop is that Auracast doesn't replace counter loops in point of sale situations yet. There may be a solution for that in the future, but at this point, there is no way to connect to an Auracast system in the same way you can connect to a counter loop at a bank teller window or a ticket counter at a theater or situations like that. So essentially, from a venue standpoint, what we believe to be the right answer is to provide what Juliet Sterkens calls the dynamic duo that will help you hear. And one of them is Auracast and the other one is a hearing loop system. And so both of these technologies provide direct to hearing device audio streaming without any additional equipment or interaction with venue staff. And so coming back to the legal requirements, I mentioned neck loops earlier, and I already told you a bit more about that. And what I said is that if your hearing device doesn't have a T-coil, you're essentially excluded from using any currently available legally compliant assistive listening system. Because you can't use an induction loop without a T-coil, but you also can't use a neck loop connected to an infrared or an FM system. So we still need T-coils, and we still need hearing loop systems. But even if hearing loop systems were dismantled tomorrow, if we took away the gas stations and we said, well, now everybody needs to use electric vehicles because we have no more gas stations, you have to use an Auracast compatible hearing device now, which would not be a good situation. If you wanted to use any of the other systems, you still need a T-coil in your device. So how long have T-coils been around? This is the first hearing device that had a T-coil in it, and this is the second one. And so these were from 1938 and 1953. And how long have hearing loops been around? This is the original patent for a hearing loop system in a venue, and this is from 1938. So from the angle of a hearing device, what features do we need to provide optimal hearing access? We looked at it from a venue standpoint, but now the question is, what do we need in a hearing device? And so the first thing is we need Auracast compatibility for multiple reasons. One is you want to be able to stream phone calls and music via Bluetooth from your phone to your hearing device. And that is a situation where Bluetooth does replace one of the use cases of telecoils. And that's what a lot of hearing providers will tell you when they say, oh, you don't need a T-coil anymore because you're using Bluetooth to stream your phone calls and music. But that's only one of the use cases of a T-coil. And so then the other reason that you want Auracast compatibility is to be able to use assistive listening, to stream your TV audio or laptop or music sharing, all the things that the Bluetooth Special Interest Group have been talking about. But then you still need a T-coil, and that is to access assistive listening systems other than Auracast in any place where they are available, which they are legally required in any place that has amplified sound, basically. And so again, if the place meets the legal requirement for assistive listening, it doesn't have to be a hearing loop. They might have an FM system or an infrared system. And if they do, they're required to provide neck loops, and that is how you connect to your hearing device. And the only way to do that is with a telecoil. And then the second reason you need a telecoil in your device is to access counter loops. There is no other way to connect to a counter hearing loop other than with a telecoil. And there's currently no solution that replaces the functionality of a counter loop. So in essence, what we need and what we should demand from manufacturers is hearing devices with both Auracast compatibility and telecoils, which I would consider to be public access ready. And so this QR code is to an article I wrote in Hearing Review that talks about how the combination of these two technologies gives you access to assistive listening, to hearing in public venues. So anybody who buys a hearing aid today ideally would buy a device that is both Auracast compatible and has a telecoil. And so if we come back to this analogy with electric vehicles, really the point to focus on is at what point will 95% of the devices in circulation be Auracast compatible? And we have no idea when that will happen. But we know it won't happen in the next 5 years. Because it's not about how fast can we install Auracast transmitters into venues or how fast can we raise awareness about it. It's about how fast will hearing aid manufacturers have Auracast compatibility in essentially all devices, and how soon are people to afford to buy new hearing devices that are then Auracast compatible. That's what we need to get to. And if you were to ask me, it'll be at least a decade, probably two. So if we look at the electric vehicle timeline of all new ones being sold being electric, or all new hearing aids being Auracast compatible, I think 2035 is probably right. I think it'll be 10, 12 years until all new hearing aids sold will be Auracast compatible. Because it's not just about the top of the line products. It's about making sure all manufacturers have them in all models, and the product development cycles take time, and FDA approval takes time. Getting the product to market takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. And we need to get to a point where essentially everybody is able to connect to an Auracast transmitter. And at that point, we can shut down hearing loop installation businesses. So what do I believe consumers should demand from hearing device manufacturers and hearing professionals? I think you should say that we want Auracast and telecoils in all hearing devices now, across all product lines and technology levels, including over-the-counter hearing aids and PSAPs. And if you look at the lineup of over-the-counter hearing aids, I believe there's one that has a T-coil, and it's not even talked about on the manufacturer's website. And when I was at CES, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January, and I talked to manufacturers of over-the-counter hearing aids and PSAPs, almost nobody even knew that Auracast existed. So there's a lot of catching up to do from a consumer education standpoint, from a venue education standpoint, and for the manufacturers. So the reason we should demand Auracast and telecoils in all devices now is to, one, accelerate the adoption of Auracast globally so that we can faster get to the point where essentially everybody has the ability to use Auracast, and to provide the best possible listening experience in all scenarios for everyone. And then in terms of venues, I think we should basically demand the same thing. We should demand that we want Auracast and hearing loops in all public venues now. And with that, we can essentially use the Auracast marketing initiatives to get venues excited and try it out. So the Bluetooth Special Interest Group is driving the adoption of Auracast at this point, and venues are starting to get excited about it. So what we can do is we can approach venues and say, hey, take a look at Auracast. This is the newest and greatest thing. You should check it out. And then once they're excited about it, we let them know that it doesn't solve the problem for most hearing aid wearers today, and that it's more of a future thing, but it provides a way to get a foot in the door and get venues excited and get them to understand that what they should provide to you is direct audio streaming to your hearing aid or cochlear implant, which Auracast provides. And then we let them know Auracast only solves that for a small fraction of people today. And what they should really do is install both technologies, Auracast and a hearing loop system, so that consumer needs today and in the future are being met at the same time. Now, with hearing loop systems, there's a few challenges. And the first challenge is that they're difficult and expensive to install. And I put that in quotes because most of the time we can solve the technical difficulties. And in terms of the expense, if you look at a total construction budget for a new building, or if you look at how much a venue spends on installing an elevator, hearing loops are cheap in comparison. And when we install loop systems at, say, a new construction project at a university, what they're spending on the loop systems is a tiny blip in their contingency budget. Like, it doesn't even get noticed. When we install a system as a retrofit and there's no project budget, it's a little more difficult to convince venues. But if you get them in from the ground up, when they're building a new facility or when they're renovating, it's a no-brainer decision. It's very easy to get a venue excited and convinced that they should install this technology. And the second challenge is that basically nobody knows about hearing loop systems. And there's a solution to solve the second issue. And the solution is to just run a global marketing campaign with the kind of budget that the Bluetooth Special Interest Group has. So very easy, and then next year, everybody will have hearing loops everywhere. Well, maybe it's not that easy because we don't have that kind of marketing budget. And what's interesting is that the Bluetooth Special Interest Group has that kind of marketing budget, but we still have challenges with Auracast. And the first challenge is, like I've talked about a lot, everybody needs to buy new hearing devices. There's currently no elegant solution to connect to an Auracast system without a smartphone. With a loop system, you can just press a single button on your device and you're connected. With Auracast, that's not a thing yet. You need to have a remote control or a smartphone so that you can select which audio stream you want to connect to in a similar way as connecting to a Wi-Fi network, because your phone or your hearing aid doesn't know which one you want to connect to. So if you're at an airport and there's multiple audio streams from multiple gates, your hearing aid doesn't know which one you want to hear. Same thing with a movie theater, for example, because the signal will travel through walls, so it's ambiguous which one you may want to connect to. Another challenge is that there's currently no solution for delay compensation in large venues, and we'll talk more about that one. And then it's currently unknown how well Auracast will work in crowded spaces. And so Auracast, or Bluetooth in general, runs on the 2.4 gigahertz band, and that is also where Wi-Fi operates. So there is interference between Wi-Fi systems and Bluetooth systems. And 2.4 gigahertz also happens to be the resonance frequency of water, which means human bodies are really good at absorbing the Bluetooth signal. So when you put a lot of bodies in a space, you increase the likelihood of the signal degrading. And there may be what's called packet loss, where you might then experience dropouts in the audio signal. And since there aren't many Auracast installations out there yet, and we don't have a lot of real world experience with it, we don't know how much of a problem this may be. So this is something that time will tell. And then problem number 5 is the same problem as with hearing loop systems. Nobody knows about it. So even with a huge marketing budget, we're unable to educate the whole world overnight at the same time to get adoption of the technology. So let's take a closer look at the delay compensation aspect, because this is what I'm working on within the scope of my research at ASU. And I just submitted a scientific paper for publication with the results of my first research study. And so earlier with the list of requirements that we need for a successful assistive listening system, one of the items on the list was that we need latency below 30 milliseconds. And here's a little video that will show you what latency sounds like. And in this video, you'll see a number on the screen, and the number tells you the time in milliseconds between the two sounds that you'll hear. And the two sounds are identical, and they're a drumstick hitting a drum. So what you'll hear is 2 drumsticks hitting a drum, and one of them will be slightly delayed compared to the other one. And what I want you to pay attention to is at what delay in milliseconds between the two sounds do you start hearing them as 2 separate sounds rather than one that blends together. So here we go. And I'll play it one more time. So most people start hearing it right around the 30 millisecond mark. Someone with a trained ear might hear it at 15 to 20 milliseconds, possibly even at 10 milliseconds. So I'll play it one more time. And so what I'm sure you've noticed is that when you get to something like 150, 200, 300 milliseconds, it's very, very noticeable. It's a huge difference between the two sounds and how far they're spread apart. And so with assistive listening technology, one of the systems I haven't even mentioned is Wi-Fi based assistive listening. And the reason it didn't even get mentioned up until this point is because assistive listening over Wi-Fi has a latency problem. It's essentially impossible to get the latency of a Wi-Fi assistive listening signal below 100 milliseconds. And so now when you hear the sound from the loudspeakers and the sound from the assistive listening at the same time, you'll start hearing this delay, and you essentially hear an echo between the two sounds. And that's a problem for a lot of people in those situations. And so one of the goals and requirements for any type of technology that has the potential to compete with the sound quality of a hearing loop system is to have latency that is short enough that you essentially don't perceive it. And so what the whole industry has worked on over the last 2 decades or so is to bring the latency of these systems down so that you don't perceive the delay. What essentially the whole audio industry forgot to think about is that there is another type of venue where we don't just need short latency, but we need precise latency that is adjustable. And the situations are large venues. So this is the Santa Barbara Bowl. It's a 5,000 seat outdoor theater, and we installed a hearing loop system in this venue. Every single seat in this venue is accessible with the loop system. And no matter where you are, you won't hear a noticeable delay between the loudspeakers and the assistive listening system. And I'll explain to you in a second why. And then another situation where this matters is at music festivals, where you have large crowds and you're spanning a huge distance between the stage, or where the loudspeakers are located, and the positions where people are located. And so when you set up a loudspeaker system in a large venue, you might only have loudspeakers at the front, and the sound travels from there to the person somewhere in the audience. And the sound travels at the speed of sound, which is roughly 1 foot per millisecond, which means that if you're 200 feet back from the stage, it takes about 200 milliseconds for the sound to get to your ears. Now, when you add in a second set of loudspeakers, so that it's not just the loudspeakers from the stage that provide the sound, what is typically done, or not just typically, it's basically a requirement to do this, is to delay the sound of the second set of loudspeakers so that the sound is synced up with the sound that travels from the front loudspeakers at the stage. So in this case, the sound from the stage takes about 100 milliseconds to travel to the second set of loudspeakers. And now we play the same sound, delayed by 100 milliseconds, so that it's aligned with the sound from the first set of loudspeakers, and people in the audience don't hear an echo between the two loudspeakers. Now, where things get interesting is when we bring an assistive listening system into the mix. Because with something like an FM system, or a loop system, or an infrared system, the signal from the assistive listening system travels at the speed of light. So it basically arrives at the receiving device instantaneously. Now, for the Wi-Fi system, there's the inherent latency in the system, and for Auracast, that'll be there too. So there might be some addition to it, but for simplicity, let's just assume there is no latency in the assistive listening system. And so now what happens is that when you're in the back of the venue, you hear the sound from the assistive listening system immediately, and the sound from the loudspeakers takes time to travel to your ears. And now you start hearing an echo because you heard the sound from the assistive listening system first, and then the sound from the loudspeakers. Now, if you're using the assistive listening system and the person next to you isn't, you can tell them you heard the band first by about a quarter second, but you have a distorted experience, so it's not particularly ideal. Now, if you're in front of the venue, you don't hear the echo because the sound from the loudspeakers doesn't take long to travel to your ears because the distance is shorter. So when you're in a small venue, or when you're in the front at a large venue, you don't perceive that the echo is a problem. But if you're further back, let's say at a concert venue like this, or at a large place of worship where the last row of seats might be 150 feet back from the altar, that's where this becomes a real problem. And so what we need to do is we need to compensate for this alignment delay between the acoustic sound from the loudspeakers and the wireless sound from the assistive listening system. And here's another QR code for you to an article that I wrote in a German audiology journal, and then I translated it to English, and it talks about this specific phenomenon and what we can do to solve it. And so there are basically two solutions to resolving this alignment delay issue. The first solution is to send a custom audio signal to each audience segment, and that is what we did at the Santa Barbara Bowl. The Santa Barbara Bowl doesn't have a perimeter loop system that covers the entire audience. It wouldn't work that way. The Santa Barbara Bowl has 5 loop systems, each on their own amplifier, and the signal to each of those segments is delayed so that it matches the travel time of the sound from the loudspeakers in the front to the center of the respective audience segment. So when you're in the last few rows of seats, something like 70 meters away from the stage, 200 feet, the sound is delayed by about 200 milliseconds so that you hear the sound from the loop system and from the loudspeakers at the same time. But that's still only an approximate solution. And with a loop system, it's relatively easy to facilitate this because the way you connect to the specific segment you want to be in is by just walking into it and activating your T-coil. But with an FM system, which most venues have, or infrared or Auracast in the future, you could connect to multiple signals. And now what you would have to do is you would have to provide multiple transmitters with multiple channels, and you would then need to know which one to connect to based on where you're sitting or standing. And when you think back to those large music festivals, you don't know how far away from the stage you are and what the correct segment is because your seat isn't a seat and it doesn't have a label. Solution to that is to compensate for the alignment delay in the receiving device. So what we can do, and this is what my research is about, is to have the hearing device listen to the sound from the loudspeakers and receive the wireless sound from the assistive listening system, then compare the two and delay the assistive listening sound so that it's synced up with the sound from the loudspeakers. And so we're currently working on developing an algorithm to do that so that it can then be implemented in hearing aids, cochlear implants, wireless headphones, earbuds, you name it, so that in the end, anybody who walks into a venue and uses Auracast has sound that is perfectly in sync between the loudspeakers and the assistive listening system. So looking back at the challenges for both Auracast and hearing loops, the real challenge is that nobody knows the technology exists. And essentially nobody knows that there's a real problem that needs to be solved for people to hear better. And most people that struggle to hear, and even people who don't struggle to hear, basically nobody knows what is even possible. And the only way someone really knows how to appreciate an assistive listening system is by trying it out. And so I've worked in this industry for 12 years now. And Juliet Sturkins and Dave Myers essentially started the hearing loop movement, I'm guessing almost 10 years prior to that, something like 2000. So it's been over 20 years where the attempted solution to these problems has been grassroots advocacy. And that has worked to some extent. We do have significantly more hearing loop systems in this country than we had 20 years ago, but we're really just scraping the surface. And as I've been using assistive listening technology more and more, and as I've been getting frustrated about it not being provided, I decided that there might be another solution to solve these problems, which is to turn up the heat. And so if we look at the legal requirement for assistive listening, that says that in each assembly area where audible communication is integral to the use of the space, the venue needs to provide assistive listening. This doesn't only affect lecture halls and theaters and city council chambers, but it also applies to conferences. It applies to music festivals. It applies to movies in the park. Pretty much any space that has loudspeakers, whether that's a permanent structure or a temporary event. And so I've been traveling to quite a few conferences, both to present and to attend. And I explored what assistive listening solutions these conferences that I went to recently had on offer. And so the first one was a conference called Accessing Higher Ground, put on by the Association on Higher Education and Disability. And this is a conference about accessibility in the higher education sector. And what this conference provided as an assistive listening system was Roger pens on demand. So I had to go to the front desk, ask for a Roger pen, And then they told me to go to the presenter, place a Roger pen on the podium, and then I could listen with a receiver with headphones. And of course, it amplified all the room acoustics, and the audio from the presentation slides wasn't tied in, but that was their solution. Then I went to CES, Consumer Electronics Show, 120,000 people in Las Vegas every January. It's a huge conference. And guess what they provided for assistive listening?
Large pens.
Nothing.
Oh, worse.
Then I presented at the American Auditory Society. This is a conference with research audiologists. In my room that I presented in, I'm guessing I had an audience of about 300, and I would guess that about half of those people were wearing cochlear implants or hearing aids. And their assistive listening solution was nothing. Then I went to Atlanta for the American Academy of Audiology, and William Sound had a little booth next to the registration desk. And I was thinking, wow, we finally have a conference that provides a proper assistive listening solution. Well, they had pocket talkers with FM transmitters on demand, basically a similar solution to the Roger pens. It wasn't connected to the sound system. All you would get was the speech, the voice of the presenter, but none of the audio that might be part of the slides. And you still had to walk up to the front, place the microphone on the presenter, stand out, and it was just a bad experience. Then there was South by Southwest, very forward-thinking, innovative conference, music and film festival in Austin every year. And I ended up not going. I had a ticket, which ended up getting refunded because their assistive listening solution was nothing. And they told me that I didn't put in a request early enough to have them set up an assistive listening system, and they could only do it in a couple of rooms. So they also just straight up ignore the legal requirement and put the burden on me. So I asked for a refund for my ticket, and that was it. And then I went to Lightning in a Bottle, which is a music festival in California. And we have history with those people because in, I believe, 2015 or so, we donated hearing loop systems to this festival. And attendees had a great experience. I met some of my now close friends there, connected with the deaf community, and it was just a fantastic experience. Eventually, they decided that they'd rather figure out their own assistive listening solution because we were too much of a pain to deal with and have them provide us with an audio signal and a power cable for the loop amplifier. So since then, they've been doing their own assistive listening again. And in the last 2 years, there was nothing. And then this year I went again, and they told me that they forgot to set up their FM systems, and they had 2 systems for a total of 8 stages. So I don't think that's legally compliant either. And then I do have some positive examples, and I'm glad they're in here. And so the first one is the Acoustical Society of America. And their conference was in Ottawa. It was my first time in Canada in May, and I presented my research. And after all of those experiences that I had just mentioned, you may be surprised to find that they had an infrared system in every single room. And they had a little booth set up with, I think, 20 receivers spread out with headphones, and it was staffed by 3 people from the audio video production company. And the reason for that is because I emailed them in advance and made sure they're aware of the legal requirements and meet the legal requirements so that I could finally tell a success story. And while the audio quality of the system wasn't great and it was cutting in and out, at least there was something there, and now I can write about it, and we can tell a story that the Acoustical Society of America gets it, while somehow the American Academy of Audiology and the American Auditory Society don't provide a proper solution that is legally compliant and meets the need of consumers with hearing disabilities. And then, of course, the prime example is the HLAA convention, where we had a hearing loop system in every room and an Auracast system in most rooms as a demo that Ampetronic and and listen technologies provided. So the big question is, how do we fix this systemic problem? Because it's not a one-off. It's not that someone made a mistake and the system wasn't installed. It's that places aren't aware or they just don't care. And the other problem is that consumers tend to not ask for assistive listening in these situations, because what we hear over and over, especially when I ask and say, what's your assistive listening solution? Venue or conference organizers or event organizers tell me that basically nobody asked for it. So what I think we need to do collectively is to go to a venue or an event that we know is legally required to provide an assistive listening system, whether that's a permanent structure or a temporary event. And I think there's a much greater need in the temporary event sector because there's essentially no awareness about this. At least for permanent venues, say city council chambers or theaters, anything in that domain, usually the architects are aware of it. There's an ADA coordinator involved. So typically there's at least an FM system in those settings. But when it comes to almost any type of temporary event, most of the time you will find nothing. So I think we should go to these places and we should ask for an assistive listening system. And if they don't have one, we engage in a solution-oriented dialogue, as I've done with several of these organizations, and sometimes that works. And sometimes they will tell you, oh, we don't have the budget for this, or nobody asked for it, so it doesn't seem to be a thing. And if that dialogue is unsuccessful, then I think we file a civil rights complaint. And that is what I've done with the Association on Higher Education and Disability for their conference in Denver, which did not provide an assistive listening system that was legally compliant or functioning. And that is what I plan to do with some of the other organizations once I have the capacity to deal with it. And after the process is complete, I think we should gather media attention with the case results and praise the organizations that comply and did the right thing, and maybe not speak as positively about the ones that clearly don't care about providing accessibility for people with disabilities. And then we repeat the whole process until we have assistive listening technology, not just in permanent structures, but at temporary events. And it becomes ubiquitous because over time, as we're going through this process, Auracast will become more and more available, and more people will have Auracast compatible devices. And with that, it'll be a lot easier to implement the technology so that in the end, all of us can hear clearly and easily in all of those settings. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Thomas. Let me just do this quick screen sharing in a minute. We're okay. Making sure I got everything I need.
Oh, we have 55 messages in the chat.
Yes, I know the 55 messages as I was keeping track of everything. Everybody was so into your project and your PowerPoint, and there were so many questions along the way, and it's just like one of those things of how you say to yourself where stand out and where everybody has to use their voice in order to promote this Auracast and able to get themselves out there. There's so many stuff around that where people need to learn the tools, the products, the technologies, and how it works, and what type of hearing aids people are supposed to, what type of hearing aid brand is compatible to Auracast, so forth. So there's this person, we got one hand raised already, and Chris Baker, I'm pretty sure he has a lot of questions to ask you because he was the one that did all this chat room. So Chris Baker, if you could unmute yourself and show the video. Go for it.
Yeah, you got it. Oh, I could ask a lot of questions, and I'm sorry that I was so negative in my responses because I'm tired of it all, to be honest with you. And I'm not even,
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
I'm deaf, but not that deaf. But I got to ask you a question, sir. You
Uh-huh.
said that at the HLAA conference they had Auracast set up, but but no one's got Auracast in their hearing aids yet. So
Right.
what was the purpose of that?
It was to demo it for people that do have Auracast compatibility, and then they had receiving devices as well with headphones, because one of the big questions around Auracast has been if the technology actually meets the low latency requirement in a robust manner. And people had a really good experience with the system in that way. So it was mainly a proof of concept and a demonstration of what is possible with the technology, independent of who can directly use it with their own device.
Right. And I'll just add one more thing. You were talking about in a large venue, delay the sound so it matches the speakers. Personally, I've been to some big conferences, and what drives me crazy is you see the guy talking on the Jumbotron and his lips move, and then later you hear what he's saying. So the echo, yeah, echo could be bad, but I'd rather have the autocast come to me directly without any delay. I can tune out the speakers
Uh-huh.
if I've got it playing right in my ear, so it matches his lips. So as I'm reading his lips, I'm hearing what he says. It's nothing more frustrating to watch like a YouTube and there's
Yeah.
a delay, so that bothers me more than anything. But I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point with the lip sync. I hadn't even thought about that from the perspective of someone who reads lips. When you're in the back, that's when that offset definitely becomes an issue. Now, when you're at a loud venue, say a movie theater or a concert, you can't really tune out the sound from the loudspeakers anymore because you'll also feel it with your body through bone conduction. But if we were to get to a point where all of us use cochlear implants and we don't depend on the acoustic space at all anymore, then we can implement your solution.
Is there any more questions, Chris, or you're all set?
Well,
I had a
could
question.
okay, I'll just ask one. I just in Ohio, the only place and I live in near a very large city, Akron. It's just south of Cleveland. In Ohio, if I look up hearing loop availability, I get one in my neighborhood, and it's a McDonald's drive-through. That's it. There's no one else. No theaters in Akron. No church. Well, there's one church, and that's supposed we have coil loop. So I went up to Cleveland on my wife's birthday just last week to Playhouse Square, which is like the prima donna place, and it says it had assisted listening. And you wouldn't believe I ended up missing the first 5 minutes of the play because I was explaining to the guys in the theater, house the house manager how to work the systems he thought wasn't even working. He had a loop that would allow you to hear without having to do headsets. But they had it so shabbily set up that I ended up going with the headsets, and that worked. But that's really frustrating. I mean, in Europe, the buses, the taxis have coil. I mean, not only stationary places, but moving places have T coil. And in America, you can't even get it in a government agency, a government facility, or a theater or whatever. And I'll shut up now. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, that's a lot of great questions and all that. I actually do have my hand raised, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand while I'm asking a question. Thomas, one of the questions I do want to know is, because based on the chat room, what specific hearing aid brand is compatible to Auracast right now at this moment? Because I'm a Phonax member and it's a very powerful hearing aid. Which hearing aid brand is now compatible?
So I wouldn't be able to answer that question. Last I know is in June when I presented at the HLAA convention, it was only Resound in their top of the line product. I don't know if anything has come out in the meantime. Um, yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that. But I think Hearing Tracker is probably a great resource for that, because they tend to list pretty much every hearing aid that's available in the market with their respective features.
Thank you. Yeah. Also, one of the things that when people want to know too is there a specific app that you would highly recommend that will um, compatible to Auracast?
I'm not sure I understand the question. An app for what purpose?
Like for example, you know how you go on settings and then you um, I'm sorry, yeah, settings and you adjust it because a lot of people are saying that sometimes the loudspeaker, I mean the speaker could be really loud and they want to able to adjust it to able to control the volume and so forth.
I see. So yeah, that would all be within the specific control app for your hearing device, where you could make those adjustments of how much amplification do you get through the microphones of the device, how much do you get through the wireless audio. So that would all be done in the hearing aid app itself.
Okay. And it looks like we got a couple of questions. Nicole, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, sure. Thank you. I just wanted to say that Starkey is a hearing aid company that has now come out with a new product line called HLAA, and all of those hearing aids are ready to be used with Auracast.
Nice.
All right, good. Thank you. And Andrea is next. Go ahead, Andrea.
Hi, thank you so much, Thomas. I'm a huge fan of yours. I heard you at the HLAA convention. I was so excited when Carrie said she was inviting you to speak. Wondering if the Auracast, because I did use it there with a receiver and a neck loop. So if I had a venue with Auracast and Auracast receivers and neck loops, why would I need to add a loop to that venue as well?
That question actually relates to another question I saw in the chat, because a lot of people are frustrated with the sound quality of neck loops. And so the primary reason for that is when you look at the orientation of a T-coil in a hearing device is typically vertical, because the field in a hearing loop system is oriented so that a vertical T-coil picks up the maximum field strength. And if you have a neck loop around your neck, the current runs circular around your neck, and that creates a magnetic field circular around the wire. So now at your ear, the magnetic field lines are horizontal, which is perpendicular to the main pickup of the T-coil. And so now the just from a physics standpoint, the way the magnetic field is aligned, if you wanted to maximize the sound from the neck loop, you would have to widen it and somehow make it like wider over your shoulders, or some people drape it over their ears. So just a neck loop in general just doesn't work well from a physics standpoint to get the magnetic field into the T-coil of the hearing aid. And then the sound quality typically also doesn't compare to that of a loop system. So that's just from a sound quality standpoint. And then the other aspect, of course, is the convenience and the independence, because you want people to be able to walk into the space, sit down, press a button on their device, and interact and appear like anybody else, rather than having to borrow a receiver and a neck loop and wear that.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions, everyone? I'm sure that you guys got a lot of questions to ask Thomas at this point. This has been a great presentation so far. I really wish I was there for the HLAA convention, but my flight got delayed and I missed your meeting that time. That was one main thing that I wanted to see. So It looks like we got everything we got up. It looks like we got questions just come on. We have just about 7 minutes left before this meeting is over. So go ahead, Alan. If you could unmute and show the turn on your video so people can read your lips.
Okay. Somebody in the chat was talking about what sounded like it's concerned over the security of the Auracast channel. Is there something you could talk about that? You were saying something about you was concerned about his phone. I guess someone being able to listen to his phone.
This is for me or to Thomas?
Oh, Thomas.
I don't think I got the question. Would you be able to repeat that?
Let me see if I can find it in the chat.
I'm the one to ask the question. It was Auracast is a one-to-many. So if you use that for your cell phone communication to your hearing aid or your streaming, wouldn't that mean everyone around you could also hear your telephone, or at least one side of it, conversation?
So yes and no. You'll still have the same Bluetooth capability that you have now with the one-to-one connection. But there is a new feature that comes with Auracast when you use it on your phone, and that's called audio sharing. So you can specifically choose to have it transmit to multiple people, and then your friends can listen to the same music as you, for example. But in general, the one-on-one private communication remains the same functionality.
Thank you. We got a couple of questions coming up. Harry, you're up. Harry, you could unmute yourself and yep.
Hi. Hopefully, I just did that. I hope my video's coming through too. I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska. Appreciate the opportunity. Thomas, great information. A couple of questions I kind of had was that my understanding is that Auracast, there's still the standards being developed for Auracast. And if so, how can some places be advertising their Auracast ready, or not necessarily ready, but they imply with a ALS system that it has Auracast with it?
Yeah, really good question. Sorry, I interrupted you. There was more to the question?
No, that's other than another question. Maybe I got to find it in the chat.
Okay, yeah. So it's a very common question when you just asked about the standards development. It's a topic that leads to frequent confusion, and so the standard, whether it's the IAC standard for hearing loop systems or the one that will govern Auracast in the future, the purpose of that is that it's a performance standard. So what it does is it serves to ensure that everybody has a good experience with an installed hearing loop system or Auracast system in this case. It doesn't govern the products themselves. It's about how the system is installed and how you interact with it. So there are currently Auracast transmitters available in the market, and there are venues that will install them and provide the signal. But it doesn't mean that everybody will have a good experience with the system per se. So as I'm sure you know from loop systems, some of them don't have the greatest audio quality because the installations don't meet the IAC standard. So the idea behind the standard is essentially to say, okay, here are requirements. If you meet those requirements with your installation, with the technology, then everybody will have a good experience. And then those standards typically get adopted into local legislation where the law says you need to provide an assistive listening system. And then by extension, it might say Auracast is one of the ways you can meet this requirement. And if you provide an Auracast system, then it shall meet these requirements or these performance criteria that are defined in the IAC standard. So what happens a lot is that the technology is available in the market before a performance standard for it exists.
So I use at our major performance center here in Lincoln, they use the Listen brand for FM. and they offer loops and headsets and buds. And I usually check out. I've had pretty good success with their loop. It's a thicker wire than I've seen on some other loop systems or neck loop systems. And I just tried one out at this conference center. We're having a conference at this week, and they just got 2 new FMs because I said, hey, ADA requires it. We need 2 for our meeting. And I'm surprised they got them. But anyway, the loop system at the performance center, I can hang around my neck and it works really good. My earphones, the hearing aids pick it up very well. This one I tested out last night at the hotel conference center. If I had it around my neck, I didn't pick up anything, but if I put it around my ears, it did sound. And I and that, that's a little awkward, but when I tried their earbud, an earpiece they got with it instead of headphones. The earpiece was very loud, worked out great. So, I mean, that could be an option too. It's not as obnoxious as headphones maybe, but for those that are shy, I'm not shy about speaking up. So,
but I'll teach you a little trick with that. So there are good neck loops and not so great neck loops. Personally, the one that Williams Sound makes, I've had good experiences with, just in terms of the field strength that it provides, and for the receiving device to be able to drive it, that it has enough power to create the signal. So I can recommend that one. But there's another trick not a lot of people know about. When you use large over-the-ear headphones, like DJ headphones or something, like big ones with a large membrane, they have a large coil that moves the membrane, right? That coil creates a magnetic field that corresponds to the audio signal, or basically contains the audio signal. So what you can do is you can use large over-the-ear headphones, plug them into the receiver, and switch your hearing aid to the T-coil setting, and the T-coil will pick up the stray field from the headphones.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to try that. I was going to take my headphones itself to the venue this week to see how well they worked with the ear loop thing. But thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and so that trick doesn't work well with the smaller earpieces because the coil isn't that large. But if you have like something that's a little beefier, they have a stronger magnetic field, and your T-coil will pick that up.
Yeah, interesting. This is a very small receiver pack. This not even the size of a deck of cards and skinny compared to the Williams. And I kind of figured it didn't have the output power, to necessarily push enough power out either. So, but yeah, I'm going to take a closer look at it Thursday and write down information what it is. I hope anyway, I'll let someone else speak. Thank you very much.
So one more thing on that note. So a lot of times the receiver pack isn't necessarily the problem. The problem tends to lie more on the neck loop itself, how the neck loop is designed and engineered. So another thing you could do is get yourself a neck loop, like a personal one that works well, and then take that to the venue and plug it into their receiving device.
Good idea, because this is a Williams AV neck loop, I think, but the device is the rest of the FM system is not Williams.
I see.
So I don't know. Yeah.
I see Chris had another question about whether there will be different Auracast standards or anything proprietary. And again, the answer is yes and no. The whole idea behind Auracast is that it is designed as a universally compatible system with interoperability between manufacturers. So from that angle, you can kind of look at it in the same way as a T-coil, right? Like a hearing loop system is globally universal. You can go to any other country and your T-coil will work with any hearing loop system you encounter. And with Auracast, it'll be the same idea. Like you can connect to any Auracast system with any Auracast compatible device. Now, where there will be differences is in the user interface, for example. Like how do you connect to an individual stream? How might you be able to customize the sound with like an equalizer setting, things like that. So there are ways in which some manufacturers will have additional features, but in terms of access to the audio signal, it'll be compatible across all manufacturers.
Thank you very much, Thomas. That's a lot of that's a great information and very useful. Your presentation was amazing. whenever you go to certain places like concerts or so forth, make sure you reach out, because there will be a lot of people there that will to accommodate for you. Reach out to the ADA. This is where I'm going. What can you offer me in order, because you want to able to have the same experience what everyone else would be having, and I understand the challenges to that, but again, there's so many technologies all over the world that would be very useful. And so it looks like we're kind of like getting through a little time extension, which is that's okay. Before we close this up, I want to able to share that we have a event coming up. Whoopsie, I didn't mean to do that. Let's see, hold on for a second. Amazing technology, so useful. Oh, sorry, I thought it was sharing to that. There we go. So we have this upcoming event, and this coming on November 24th at the Watertown Free Public Library. On November 24th is at 123 Main Street, Watertown, with a guest speaker named Betty Haddock. She is a fireman. She's really so many amazing stories about her. So there's a lot of information that you can reach out to in order to make sure that you guys log on and check out our HLAA/Boston.org, or you can check out on our social media platform, HLAA/Boston, to get some more information and to register into our Eventbrite. And we really hope that you guys join us to this wonderful event. This is actually our first physical in-person meeting ever. So if you guys have any questions, need anything, please feel free to reach out. I want to say thank you very much to Thomas, Carrie, who's our president, HLAA Boston chapter. Carrie, do you have any questions or anything that you would like to add?
No, just, thank you so much, Thomas. I really feel that folks have been highly engaged, and just watching the chat, a lot of good things we learned today. And I think the challenge to us to really push this is a great thing. So we're going to talk more about how we might become very active in advocacy for our community. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I see some people that asked me a couple of questions. I have just gave you my email address if you have any questions about this upcoming event on November. So feel free to take a picture and email me for any questions. So thank you very much, everyone, and happy Halloween.